Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's time for another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me, as always, is Justin Gay, your host and director of content. We decided to hang on this week until after the draft on Thursday night to record episode 244, and I'm glad we did. Although the draft, Justin, wasn't as exciting as I anticipated it was, we did see, I think, what everyone thought we'd see out of the number one pick with the Arizona Cardinals. But it was a few teams coming up with surprises, and it wasn't the surprises that we thought we'd see that kind of left me feeling a little bit disappointed at the end of this draft. And I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about that here in segment one as we do cover that NFL draft. And of course, we'll have to hit up the talk-worthy news, and I don't know if it's worthy of anything when we're talking about Tyreek Hill, a huge disappointment out of Kansas City, especially 1 year removed from the Kareem Hunt scandal. So the Chiefs, as good as they looked on the field with Patrick Mahomes leading that offense, they're falling apart in terms of these guys having bad decisions when it comes to domestic issues. Then in segment two, we'll hit up the NBA playoffs. We thought most of the series, if not all of them, would be wrapped up at this point. But we still have two series that are alive, and it's maybe one series that we thought and one series that is a little bit surprising to not only us, but the world of NBA as a whole. We'll talk about that in segment two. We'll wrap up with our thoughts on our favorite team, the Philadelphia 76ers. Do they have a chance here in round two against a tough Toronto Raptors team? A lot of good games coming in round two of the NBA playoffs. We'll have all of that for you and more right here on episode 244 of Talk Back.
Welcome back to episode 244. Let's jump into the NFL draft. That's the big topic right now. We actually, as Eric said there in the teaser, we actually pushed this episode back to be post-draft instead of pre-draft because there's so much news that can break. We didn't want to record a podcast on, say, Tuesday, and by the time we got it out, there had been a lot of stories that had already broke, especially when you had the Raiders and the Giants with multiple first-round picks and not sure what was going to happen with Josh Rosen and even at the top of the draft. But, Eric, before we start, I think the NFL kind of flexed their muscle a little bit last night when we were watching this draft, and you got to see Nashville and just how many people were there to listen to picks. They weren't watching a game. They were just listening to a handful of guys and seeing them from, if they could even see them, maybe on a television screen, walk up on stage, get a hug, get a picture, and then go away. And some of the guys weren't even there. And there was just, I think Goodell said 200,000 people there. There was just a ton of people. It looked like New York at New Year's Eve. Just amazing, the NFL. So they've moved this draft around. They got it out of New York City. They've had it in Philly and in Dallas, Chicago, and now Nashville. Next year is Vegas. But just at the top, I know that the NFL gets hit a lot. There's a lot of negativity around the league. But it seems like, Eric, when this league is cleaned up and when there's not a bunch of political garbage that's going on and there's not criminal cases that are happening with their athletes, the NFL is just far beyond the most popular sport in America.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's a good take because I've been to Nashville several times. It's one of my favorite cities. I've been there on business. I've been to that area of the street that they were on. I've been there with my family. It's a beautiful city. It's a fun city. It's obviously Music City. And the place that they chose to put the stage, and by the way, the stage was fantastic. I thought they did a nice production. I think it looked like any other concert that you would see, big ticket price type of concert. You had Titan Stadium in the background, obviously the bars and the restaurants and things along lining the sides of the streets, and then the crowd just filling the street from as far as you could see up to the front of the stage where really the action was happening for the teams that were making their selections. I thought it was a good event, and I thought it really made for nice TV, and if you were there, I'm sure it was exciting. The NFL had TVs and monitors and really good media up around the area of the stage and even a little bit further back than that. So I'm guessing if you were there, it was a good fan experience. I thought they put on a great show. And then you had the live band behind Goodell when he was making his picks and after that. And it just seemed like a very good production. It had good value to me. And I watched the whole thing from first pick all the way to 32. A little bit surprised at 32 what the Patriots did. We'll talk about that in a second. But I was intrigued the whole time, and now not intrigued by the picks necessarily, but again, the production of the event, like you said, we're not watching a game. We're just watching people make picks, and then the commissioner come out and announce the picks. I like what they do with the Make-A-Wish kids and the historical athletes and special guests coming up to help announce picks. I think that's a good throw in there. It just makes it more human. It makes it more personal. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time. And yeah, like you said, you're not watching a game. You're not down to the final second. You're not looking at who's going to win the game. And yet it seemed to be entertaining the whole entire time.
Yeah, and I think to the 2-week buildup that they have, I think this year was a little bit different because you really didn't have a lot of big-name quarterbacks. It felt like the media almost had to try to overhype this draft because I felt like coming into this week, Eric, there really wasn't a lot of buzz around the draft. There really wasn't a good sense. It was a lot of defensive linemen that felt like we're going to go early in this draft. And then basically all the talk was if Kyler Murray was going to go number one. And all week, I don't know if it was from the Cardinals side trying to build leverage for this pick to see if anybody wanted to come up and take it, they could get a better offer, or it was simply the networks just trying to create clickbait of, well, the Cardinals aren't sure what they're going to do at number one, but they end up going Kyler Murray with the number one pick in this draft. So, Eric, we talked about this. It wasn't that long ago. I think in January, we were talking if Kyler Murray should choose baseball or football. Now he's the number one pick in this draft. And it's for a franchise that's been sort of a staple of our podcast in terms of a laughingstock in this Cardinals roster that has just been devoid of talent, devoid of names. Well, now they may have the biggest name in the draft, and they have definitely the guy who's going to have a lot of intrigue around him to start this year and how he's going to work in with this Cliff Kingsbury offense. But did you like the pick for the Cardinals?
I did, because it's a Kingsbury-led offense. And so you look at this pick and you say, okay, it's a guy that fits his system. He's going to start off in year one with the personnel that he wants behind center. I think you're hoping that David Johnson is more healthy. You have kind of a 1-2 tandem there that just has more firepower than they've had the past couple of years. I think it's a good building block for this franchise. And you go out and you get a name who Kyler Murray is probably the biggest name other than Nick Bosa in this draft, or at least in this first top 5 or 6 picks. And so it's going to move the needle for a franchise that really needs that needle to be moved. They're in an NFC West. That's a tough division. We talked about that last week with Seattle making the big move for a big contract on Russell Wilson. Teams in this division right now are on the up and coming. Teams like San Francisco are going to be better than they have been the past couple of years. Teams like Arizona are bound to be better because they're making investments in their coaching staff and in these huge, I would say, reaches, but we'll see what Kyler Murray is, but these big picks in the draft that move the needle. So I think it's a good thing for them, but here's what I'm not really sure about. If this doesn't work out, and if Josh Rosen goes to another team and develops, we see 1 year out of Josh Rosen, and no, he didn't look great, but we know he's also been in an offense that's been struggling. So I think what's going to be interesting is 4 years from now, when Kyler Murray is looking for that big deal, getting off of the rookie contract, which one has a higher ceiling at that point? That's really going to be the marker that tells us if this was the right move. Now, for Kyler Murray, it paid off. I mean, baseball, football, we talked about the fact that in baseball, he's likely not going to be a household name. He might be a household name in the city for which he goes to, but number one pick in the NFL draft. Now, everybody knows who you are. Yeah, you're on a rookie deal. You get a nice deal to start with. Likelihood of him getting a deal after that is probably pretty high if he's at least somewhat productive as a quarterback. And I think a lot of people feel like he will be, potentially even like a Russell Wilson type quarterback. So the fact that he goes number one, I think his risk paid off. I think he's now a household name. I think he has the opportunity to take the reins of a Cardinals team that desperately needed a leader outside of Larry Fitzgerald, who is, soon to be done. And we go from there. So I think for them, it was a risk that paid off, and we'll see if it actually pays off on the football field.
Yeah, I think he's a good fit because of Kingsbury. But here's the two things that I had an issue with. Number one, everybody has talked about the fit with Cliff Kingsbury. He has to have a quarterback like Kyler Murray to make his system work. Well, this was a guy, if I'm not mistaken, that had Baker Mayfield come through Texas Tech, and he had Patrick Mahomes come through Texas Tech. And he still had a losing record there. And you're in the Big 12 where defense is optional. Everybody's got a good offense, and yet he really never made any noise, and he had two of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL right now come through that program. So that's one concern, is like just because you get Kyler Murray doesn't necessarily mean that Cliff Kingsbury's system is going to be successful. It wasn't all that successful with these guys. There was a reason why Baker Mayfield had to go to Oklahoma to get with Lincoln Riley, where he really took off. And it felt like even Mahomes wasn't the first pick in the draft. The Chiefs basically moved up and got him in the middle of the first round, or 10 to 15 range they had to move into to get him. So it wasn't like there was a ton of noise about him at that point. So those are the two things that I have issue with that I pause on. The other point is, Eric, I didn't hear any other teams outside of Oakland, and that was more early on, that really felt like they had any interest in Kyler Murray. Every other team was shying away. It was the height. It was the style. It felt like it was sort of Cardinals or bust. And I wondered last night when I heard the pick at 1, I started to think, I wonder if they would have went Bosa, how far Kyler Murray would have dropped. If they could have got past the Raiders at 4, where would he have fallen to? Maybe then you start looking at would Oakland at 24 take him, where the Cardinals could have jumped back in, and then they could have had Nick Bosa and been able to get Kyler Murray and really had two studs to build around. I mean, they have the first pick in the second round coming up. They've got quite a bit of assets. They've got good early round picks because of their poor record. It didn't seem like Kyler Murray fit anyone else's system. And the talk was, oh my gosh, if Kyler doesn't go number 1, he could have an Aaron Rodgers type fall where he's just dropping and he's just sitting in the green room just watching these teams, because once you got past Oakland at 4, then it was Washington didn't seem to be interested. They were more on Haskins and Jones. The Giants, Dave Gettleman is still gushing about his love affair for Jones from Duke that they drafted, and how he fell in love with him at the Senior Bowl after 3 series, which is a topic we got to get into. I don't know if they did their due diligence to really see, hey, maybe we can get this guy. And like you said, everybody, it seemed like from Denver on back, was willing to move, especially when you got into the 20s. There was a ton of movement. It just felt like maybe with Rosen sitting there, maybe you roll the dice. Maybe you take Bosa at 1, and then you just sort of let the board play out. And then you can jump back in and get Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Just felt like maybe they had an opportunity to get 2 game-changing type players for the franchise, and maybe they missed that opportunity. That's what I was thinking, that they got themselves enamored with having to take Kyler Murray at number 1, and they never got off of that, and everybody just gave them a free pass because of the Kingsbury-Murray connection and potential for that offense. But I still think there's a lot of questions around it.
Yeah, I think that's really a valid point there, and I think it's going to depend, exactly what you said, whether Kyler Murray and Kingsbury have a connection that works out is going to be the difference between whether this is a genius move for a certain franchise or whether it's a complete bust, especially if you give up Rosen and he goes on to have more success later on.
Yeah.
We've seen QBs, I mean, like a Jared Goff, who everyone was talking about, is this guy a bust after the first year? And then he picks up the pace, obviously gets rid of Jeff Fisher, but picks up the pace and looks really good after that. And so we might see the same thing from Josh Rosen. We don't know. He's going to go to a different team. I would think he has to. The Cardinals have to get value from him being as high as they picked him last year. They've got to retain that value. And so he's going to play in the NFL for a different team. He's going to be a starting quarterback. I just want to see how that plays out before I know. The only thing I would say as a counterpoint to your point about him falling that far back is you have a couple of teams where desperation doesn't really seem to bother them. Do the Raiders at 4 take a Kyler Murray? Like you said, I mean, they took Cleveland Farrell, who surprised us all because he was on everybody's mock drafts at least 25 or later. Some even had him in early second round. They take him at 4. Well, if Kyler Murray happens to be still available at number 4, do they say, oh, well, the Derek Carr experiment is over, we'll take Kyler Murray? And Gettleman, yeah, he's gushing over Daniel Jones at 6, but I have to believe that Kyler Murray would have moved the needle more, especially for either that team or Gettleman in the eyes of the beholder, right? Because pretty much all of the fans in the New York area can't stand their GM if they're a Giants fan. And so does Kyler Murray get snagged by the Giants instead of Daniel Jones? In other words, is he really high on Daniel Jones because Kyler Murray is off the board?
No, I disagree with that. I think
Okay.
David Gettleman's an old school guy. I don't think he had any inkling of ever taking Kyler